landed my dream job as a tenure-track assistant professor at an R1 university before I even finished my PhD. I didn't have crazy connections, I didn't go to an Ivy League university, but I learned a lot along the way, and I want to share some of those tips and tricks with you all for landing your dream job in academia. So this is part one of a three-part series, and this video is focused all on the application process. The next video is focused on the interview process. So the first half of this video is going to be some answers to some general questions about how many jobs you apply to, where do you find jobs, and then the second half of the video I will walk piece by piece through each part of the application, including the cover letter, the CV, diversity statement, things like that. So I want to start off with a quick disclosure that this video is based on my own personal experience on the job market in the 2024 to 2025 cycle, looking for jobs that started in the fall of 2025. I actually just finished my PhD last week, successfully defended the dissertation, and I focused in rhetoric and composition, and I was looking for mostly professor jobs in rhetoric and composition, in writing studies, and adjacent fields like that. I know fields vary vastly. I know the humanities varies quite a bit from STEM disciplines, even within English, which is my discipline. You have rhetoric and composition, you have literature, which there's a lot of variation just between those two. So again, this is all coming from my own experience, focusing on rhetoric and composition jobs. So the number one question that I get a lot is, how many jobs did you apply to? I think my final number of jobs that I applied to was 47. For some of you, this is going to sound like a lot of jobs because there aren't even 47 openings in your discipline, and for some of you, that might not sound like that many. To put this into perspective, for rhetoric and composition, there were over 100 jobs that I could have applied to. I chose to strategically narrow it down because I wanted to make the most of each application, and I didn't want to waste time applying to jobs that didn't actually excite me and that were located in places where I didn't even want to live. I would say my own experience applying to about 50 jobs is probably pretty average for people in my discipline. Another common question is, where do you find jobs? So I found the most jobs actually by setting job alerts from Indeed. I know that this typically sounds like that's what you do in the corporate world or in the alt-ac world, but not what you do in academia. But Indeed was the first place that these jobs were posted, and I got email notifications whenever new jobs were posted in rhetoric and composition. They went straight to my phone, and I was able to be on top of everything. The second best place for me was higher ed jobs, and you can filter this by discipline, by location, by job type, tenure track, non-tenure track, and this was really, really great, and I found that this had jobs from all the other sites sort of conglomerated into one place. MLA job search is another big one. MLA is specifically for English. And then the last place was also just on listservs. So in English, specifically in rhetoric and composition, there's the writing studies listserv, and people will send out job notifications and I would get them directly to my email. If you're not sure where to find jobs in your discipline, I recommend reaching out to your advisors, reaching out to some more senior grad students, or maybe if there's someone who has recently just tackled the job market, ask them where they were finding jobs. And then another common question I receive is, how do you know which jobs to apply to? So some people follow the strategy of applying to anything and everything. I personally applied to jobs where I could see myself being a fit and jobs that sounded exciting to me. So one caveat here is I always give the advice of don't self-vet yourself. So let's say there's a job that you're really excited about. It's in a dream location for you. There's dream faculty who you'd be working alongside as colleagues, but the call asks for some skills that you don't line up with 100%. For example, there were some of these jobs for me that wanted skills more in professional and technical writing, and that's not really my specialty. I still chose to apply to some of these because why not? I've heard it said by my advisor and other people on my committee that sometimes people on search committees don't even know what they're looking for until they see it. So I actually received quite a few interview requests from these jobs, specifically in professional and technical writing, and that's not even my specialty. So don't self-vet yourself. If you don't line up with all of these requirements 100% exactly, just send the application anyway if it's something that's exciting to you. Another piece of advice that goes along with that is the job market is unlike anything you've ever done before, probably. My advisor gave me the statistic that if I was receiving any interview requests from 30% of the schools that I was applying to, that was top tier, which is really, really wild. Because if you think about my whole journey as a student, really since I've been in kindergarten, if I received a 30% on anything, that's failing. That's failing quite badly. So to view 30% as like top tier, really crushing the job market, required me to really just like reorient my brain and rethink about everything completely differently. You're gonna experience a lot of rejection. That's just the way it goes. So another question that I receive a lot is, how do you keep track of everything? So when you're applying to this many jobs that each have a different deadline, that want you to submit different materials on a different website through a different portal, you have to stay organized. So I personally used a Google spreadsheet that I found on Twitter from another academic in my field. And if you want this template, I can link it in my description box. So another option for those of you who might not think as sort of like linearly, but might need to see things more visually, is Scrintle. So I'm partnering with Scrintle on this video, which is an amazing online software that lets you see all of your ideas sort of come to life. It's an infinite whiteboard where you can have boxes and draw arrows to connect everything. If you're the type of person who would rather make a mind map brainstorm than sort of a bulleted list, this is the platform for you. As someone who's a really visual person, I only wish that I found this platform sooner and thought to use this to sort of keep track of all of my job search materials. So here is a simple little system that I've created using a bunch of different blocks and then connecting arrows. So these are the key parts that you're going to need to keep track of everything. The first primary block would be the school name, the title of the position, so assistant professor, writing center director, etc., and then the due date of the application. And then I would always recommend posting a link to the actual job description, whether you're finding that from MLA Job Search or you're finding it from Indeed. And then I cannot stress this enough. If you take nothing away from this video, the single most important thing is to copy and paste the job description into a PDF and then upload the PDF directly here. So Scrintle actually makes this really easy because you could upload docs, whether they're Word docs or PDFs, really simply. So by having a connecting arrow right here, you always remember that you're not just copy and pasting the link, but you're also having the actual document with the job description. And the reason for this is because a lot of the times when you're going back to look at the job description in order to prep for the interview or potentially for the campus visit or something, that job description is often removed from the website. And this is something I'll talk about in the second part of this video, or the next video in this series, where I explain how to prep for interviews. Take my word for it, always upload the specific job posting here. And then the next block that we see are all the various elements that you might need to include in this application. And by creating this as a sort of to-do checklist, which is a feature that Scrintle offers, you can just sort of check the various things that you're going to need. I'm going to need a teaching portfolio. I'm going to need diversity statement. Another way to use this would be to simply just write only the ones that you need. So maybe you don't need a diversity statement for this. So you could simply delete that one, and then you could check off the ones that you have already submitted. And then lastly, this block here is a way to keep track of where that application is. Maybe they requested additional materials from you. Maybe you've received a first round interview. Maybe you've made it all the way to a campus visit. Maybe you've even received an offer. And this will offer you a way to continuously go back and look and check on the status of your application. So ideally for each job, you would simply hold shift and copy and paste all of this and create a new system for yourself. But if you want to create this for the first time on your own, I will walk through exactly how I did that. It's really, really simple, and you can use all these tools here at the bottom. You could also color customize it with any color pattern that you like. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go to creating a text block. And I simply started with creating text. And then you have this infinite whiteboard where you can click and add it wherever you want. And I typed school name. So let's say I'm filling this out as if it was an actual job. We'll go with Indiana University because that's where I'm at right now. Add another one. Let's say the job is an assistant professor. Enter to hit another one. And let's say the due date is 10/9/25. The next thing that I have here is a place to upload a link. So I would go look for the place to upload a link, web link, move it wherever I want, click. The next one I have is to upload a file, upload a PDF,
right there. And then I have these they're technically to-do lists. So a task list right here. And then another task list right there. And the next thing you're going to do is you're going to color code it all. You're going to click this button to change the color. You have all these different options. Let's say we want to make this one like pinks and sunset colors. Then this we might make orange. This we might make yellow. And then this is the most fun part, drawing these connectors. So this is where you literally just click and drag these arrows. And you can change those colors too, of course. So this is an example of me creating a board completely from scratch. But if you want to use a template, they have a bunch of templates that are really awesome for studying, for note-taking, for anything that you could possibly think of needing for school. All right here, weekly planner, some journal entries, timelines. So for example, here's what this board might look like as you continue filling it out. These are just made up jobs. So we have this IU one, I created one for potentially UF, which is my undergrad. As you submit each job, you can just check off the various elements that you've submitted, and it's a way to stay up to date with where you stand on everything. And ultimately seeing everything spelled out for you visually is not only more conducive for different types of planning and learning for different people, but it's also just a lot more fun. Really makes it feel like a playground for the mind.
And then the last piece of advice or question before I go into each of the parts of the application would be thinking about a personal brand. So before I set my very first application, I really sat down and I thought, how do I want to brand myself to these jobs? I had this way of thinking already because of my YouTube channel and because of just social media content creation, coming at it from that angle. I know personal brands are just something that's really pushed on you if you're in the social media space. But I really thought about how can I use this same concept in academia as well. And I came up with a formula or pattern or structure that you might use using Scrintl as well. So this would be a really good activity to really just create a mind map in 4 key areas. One being research, one being teaching, one being service, and then the last one being a miscellaneous category. Put anything and everything from your passions to your interests to experiences that you have on your CV and start drawing arrows and connecting and see what key ideas really stand out to you.
So let's walk through this mind map self-branding activity and how I created it using Scrintl. So just like I did with the job market master list for staying organized, I also created text blocks for each various element here. I used headers for these, so they're a little bit bigger. You could also just manually change the font size. And I color-coded each category to keep things organized. And this is where the arrows really come in handy. So I started off with these 4 areas: research, teaching, service, and miscellaneous. And then I started thinking of various categories and then creating various different levels and hierarchies of experiences and information, building off of each one, really making the most of those arrows. So for example, with teaching, I just started dumping everything from my brain, truly mind mapping all the things and catchphrases that I think are important to my teaching. Digital literacy, everyday transferable skills. I really try to make my teaching relevant and fun, equitable assessment practices. And then a word that my advisor gives me a lot to talk about my teaching is the word innovative. So I would manually add a little text box here, shrink it as needed, just truly drag it over, change the color to green, then draw an arrow connecting the two. And then from here, I might think of ways to build upon this. What do I mean by innovative? And this would be a really good place to maybe upload some more PDFs of specific lesson plans or of specific assignments I've created that I think are really innovative. And the way that I made this mind map is not only dumping everything from my brain, but also having my CV in front of me and trying to visually translate all of those experiences from something linear to something that we can see sprawled out in front of us, and to make it a lot more fun, to make it really a playground for the mind. The research category, I have all of my main elements of research here, and this would be another place where I would also click PDF and potentially upload my actual publication here. So the miscellaneous category is probably going to be the most difficult for those of us who are like traditional academics. We've been trained with experience in teaching, trained with experience in research, and we often have some service categories here. With miscellaneous, I encourage you to think as creatively as possible about things that might not seem connected to your research and to your teaching, and really challenge yourself to find ways that they may actually be connected. So because a lot of my research is about social media, media studies, and about vlogs specifically, it makes sense to talk about my experience creating a YouTube channel and studying YouTube. But some other things that I also talked about are my experience working as a social media coordinator. This might not seem like it's relevant to academia at all, but this is a way that I was able to say I have some real world experience with these skills, and I can even think of a way to tie it into these everyday transferable skills that I think are so important for students. And then you start connecting categories with each other to create something that is more fully fleshed out. If you're getting stuck and you don't know what to include here, I encourage you to reach out to someone else. Like how I reached out to my advisor and he was like, you need to be using the word innovative. What you're doing is really innovative. Reach out to a friend, make a writing center appointment. And also, by seeing everything laid out for you in Scrintle, you can see which areas are more fully developed, which ones may be lacking a bit, and you can then go in and see which ones you really want to focus on. So maybe I really want to focus on writing center work. So maybe I'll make this one stand out by creating it in a different color code or something like that. Or maybe I will make it bold or italicize it. Everyone's Scrintle boards are going to be uniquely customized to them. No two people's boards will look the same. I just want to give you a way of using this tool to really think creatively and to have some fun and thinking about how to brand yourself and thinking about getting ready for the job market. Another way that you can also do this is, of course, by using the template for mind mapping. So what that looks like is this right here. I wanted a little bit more freedom with mine, and I just always prefer to start from scratch rather than using templates. But if you're the type of person who really thrives off of a template, they have a mind mapping template that is perfect for you. So I would love for you to tell me in the comment section how you plan on using Scrintle for this mind mapping, self-branding, or to stay organized with the job market. If you have any other ideas for using Scrintle, what questions you have about anything, and if you want to sign up and test it out for yourself, click the link in my description box.
Okay, so jumping into the different parts of job applications. I feel like each of these parts could be their own video, and if there's one specific material that you want to know more about, please leave a comment and let me know. But I'm sort of just going to do a really broad overview of all of the different parts that you may be asked for. On a bare minimum, every single job I applied to asked me for at least a CV, which is a curriculum vitae, which is an academic version of a resume, and then a cover letter. In my experience, and from what I've been told, these are the two most important aspects of all jobs that you will apply for. Your cover letter needs to be perfect, and it needs to be tailored. So let's start off by talking about the cover letter. I recommend thinking of your cover letter as having 5 different parts. So you have your introduction, which is really no more than a couple sentences where you tell them who you are, and you lay out 3 main aspects that you're interested in. And these will map on to sort of 3 body paragraphs. And then you have your conclusion. So after your introduction, you will spend the most time talking about that first major concept that you laid out in the intro. If this is an R1 job, this is going to be the part where you talk about your research. You talk about where you've been published, you talk about what your research interests are, you answer any specific questions that the job posting might say that they wanted answered. You also use the same language from the job posting. For example, I typically talk about my work as relating to multimodal composition, but if the job posting wanted someone who did digital literacy, these terms can essentially be interchangeable. So I would use the language of digital literacy. It doesn't seem like a really difficult thing to do, but these small differences I really think made all the difference and helped set my application apart because I was able to spell it out for them how I was a good fit for their job. Then the second section that I typically focus on would be my teaching experiences, and sometimes I would also include some of my writing center experiences. But if this was a teaching focused position, so a teaching professor rather than like an R1 research professor, I would put my teaching before I put my research. And I would delve into the different types of classes that I've taught, some of those outcomes, And then the last paragraph would sort of be a miscellaneous section. Sometimes this would be service if it was a non-tenure track position. Sometimes this would be my YouTube channel if it was related to digital literacy or things like that. Sometimes this would be where I have led some faculty trainings so I can show that I'm a good collaborator and I've worked with faculty before. And this is the shortest section of the 3 body paragraphs. And then lastly, you have your conclusion. And this is, again, really simple and short. This is where you say, if you want to learn anything more, please don't hesitate to contact me. And this is where I would also say, if you want to know more, please check out my website. And I would link to a very, very basic Google Sites that I just used a template. It was a free version. I did have a custom domain. And this would be a way for people to learn more about me if they wanted to. They could click that hyperlink and they could see my personal website that had a bunch of different information about teaching, some videos of me teaching, information about my positionality statement, all of that good stuff. And in the same vein, I cannot recommend hyperlinks enough. Anytime I could hyperlink something in my cover letter, I would. Whether I was hyperlinking to another PDF, like my teaching portfolio when I mentioned teaching, or it was hyperlinking to a specific website. This was a way to give context and information to the search committee that they might not know that they even needed. For example, I won a pretty prestigious teaching award called the Lieber Memorial Associate Instructor Award, which means a lot if you're at IU, but it means nothing if you're not here. So when I mentioned that I won that award, I linked to the sort of award page on IU's website where it sort of gave a rundown of who I am, what my teaching interests are, and it's a place for you to learn more about the award and just how competitive it is. So to give some context to it. My cover letters ultimately had between 5 and 10 hyperlinks. And I know that this might sound like a lot, but if people didn't want to click those specific links, they simply didn't have to. This was just giving them the option to click it. And I know some of you might be worried about like the technicalities of that. When you convert it to PDFs, sometimes you have to manually go in and add the hyperlink, but for the most part, I would write in Microsoft Word, add the hyperlink, and when I transferred it to a PDF, which is the format that all jobs wanted materials in, it almost always transferred. So if your cover letter is where you highlight these key experiences, you focused on just a few in these key areas of research and teaching and then sort of miscellaneous, your CV or your curriculum vitae is where you have everything. CVs for academics, especially tenured faculty, can be upwards of 20 pages, which is absolutely wild. I think that mine was only about 6 or 7 pages, so don't feel overwhelmed if you don't feel like you have that much experience. So curriculum vitae are also something that can be tailored depending on the specific job. For example, if it was an R1 research position, I always started off by having a dissertation abstract, by stating my research interests, by starting with my list of publications, and then I would go into teaching, writing center experience, and stuff like that. But if it wasn't a research-focused job, if it was a teaching professor job, if it was a writing program administrator or writing center director, I would start off with whatever was most appropriate. And this isn't lying or changing your CV at all. It's simply just thinking about the rhetorical situation and moving the order of the different chunks that you have. It's about the hierarchy of information. What are they going to see first, and ensuring that you are making it as obvious to them as possible that you are a good fit for this job. Put that information first. Don't make them have to dig for it in your CV. You also really want your CV to be organized, to be clean, all your lines to be straight. I really contemplated doing a design CV, which is pretty big in digital rhetorics, but I ultimately decided against it because I had a lot of other materials that already showed sort of my digital literacy skills, like this website, like my YouTube channel, and I thought that the risk might not be worth the payoff. There's a lot of different resources out there for CVs. A few big mistakes that I see are putting a photo of yourself on your CV. That's not something that you need. And then also failing to have hyperlinks in the CV. Anytime a publication was posted online, I hyperlinked it in my CV. Same thing with the teaching award, same thing with anything possible to be hyperlinked on the CV. Because we're accessing these materials in digital formats, why not just hyperlink it? So those are the 2 main documents that every single job asked me for. And then there's a variety of other documents, and I've seen pretty much every combination of the following. I've seen people ask for cover letter CV and then a teaching philosophy statement. No teaching philosophy statement, but a teaching portfolio. Neither teaching portfolio nor teaching philosophy statement, but a research statement. So be prepared for any possible combination. I'm going to run through all of the following just really briefly. So the first one is a teaching philosophy statement. And this is a really tough genre because I think it's really easy to sort of devolve into something more abstract and poetic and philosophical because it's a teaching philosophy. But I think that it's really a misnomer. And this is a place for you to be as concrete and specific as possible. Make a claim and support it with evidence, just like every other form of writing you've been doing since the dawn of time. This is a place for you to say what you teach, so the courses you've taught, the type of curriculum you choose to teach, the assignments you create, and then why you teach the way that you teach. What are your sort of guiding values, etc. Sometimes these documents on the job posting will have specific questions like, we want you to speak to how you teach in classrooms with 12 or fewer students. And those are things that you'll have to find ways to weave those pieces of information in, but for the most part, they just ask for a teaching philosophy statement, at least in my experience. So for example, in your teaching philosophy statement, let's say that you like to teach assignments that really help students develop critical thinking skills. Great, that's a great thing to be doing in your classroom, but you're gonna wanna get more specific. You're going to want to not only detail those assignments, but you're going to want to explain why critical thinking skills are important and how you know that students actually gain those skills. So there's a lot of different ways you can do this. Once again, you can hyperlink your assignment sheets. That's what I did. You could give a little brief description of the assignment sheets. You can include information from your teaching evaluations. For example, in my evaluations, when students were asked if they developed critical thinking skills, 98 out of 100 students said they strongly agreed that they developed critical thinking skills. You might even consider linking students' work, a sample work. Of course, only if you have permission from students, and I would always anonymize this. I did this in my teaching portfolio, which I'll talk about next. Just gonna wanna be as specific as you can. I know this advice is given with resumes. Whenever you could give numbers, give numbers. Whenever you could give specific details about places or things to really bring them to life and describe them, I always recommend doing that. You can also think about citing people from the discipline. So I have 2 or 3 different people that I cite in my teaching philosophy statement who give examples of sort of good pedagogy or who talk about core values of the discipline of rhetoric and composition. Some of them I have a quote from, and some of them I sort of translate and talk about their framework of pedagogy. So the teaching portfolio statement is something that is really only asked for in teaching focused jobs. And this is a really long document. These can easily be upwards of 80 pages. I've seen teaching portfolios larger than 100 pages as I've tutored in the Writing Center. And I'm gonna talk to you about some ways to really pare this down. Surprise, surprise, it's with hyperlinks. So sometimes teaching portfolios are going to tell you specific things that they want in the job posting. Like, we want to see 3 sample syllabi, we want to see your explanation of your course units. But for the most part, they'll probably just say we want a teaching portfolio. And different people include different things in their teaching portfolio, but what I included in mine was 3 sample syllabi, and I included them just as pictures of the course. Then you could click on the picture and it would link you out to the syllabus, because syllabi can be like 12 pages, and I didn't want to really like make the file not only too big to upload to these sites, but also just to feel like unwieldy when people open it. I also included 3 different sample assignments, and with student permission, I hyperlinked examples of previous student work and I anonymized it. Sometimes if they don't ask for a teaching philosophy statement, you could put this into the teaching portfolio. I also included descriptions of different units in one example course and sort of my rationale for why I broke the course into these different units. People have mixed opinions on this, but I included evidence of teaching effectiveness, which for me was my student evaluations that we have at the end of every year. And I went the extra step to put these all into graph format, and to add extra context, I included graphs that showed my average in each area along with the departmental average and then with the university average to show that I was higher than the average of the department and in the university. Otherwise, showing that I'm a 3 out of 5 and being prepared for class sort of means nothing to the readers on the search committee. And then the last thing that I chose to include in my teaching portfolio was my philosophy on assessment and feedback. Feedback and assessment are really important to me, and they're something that I'm constantly working on as an instructor. And I really play around with the modality. I often ask students how they want feedback, if they want it in video, audio, or written format. So I gave some examples of the way that I've provided feedback in those different formats. And I just showed the way that I create rubrics, and my feedback sort of aligns with these rubrics in a way that aims to create a dialogue rather than coming across as like the proverbial sort of like red ink on paper. The next document that you might be asked for, especially in R1 jobs, is a research statement. This can be phrased in a couple of different ways. I've seen it called research statement, I've seen it called dissertation abstract, research abstract, overview of your research. In my opinion, I used a really similar document for all of them. And what I did here is I started off with a really broad overview of what my research is about. And this is hard because you don't want to repeat the same language that you used from your cover letter. You can be more specific. The cover letter is the broadest overview. The research statement is where you're getting into the nitty-gritty. And I would say, in general, my research is focused on these three areas. So multimodality, embodiment, composition pedagogy. I've previously published about X, Y, and Z, and then I'd include hyperlinks to those publications. And then I would say I'm currently working on finishing my dissertation, which I aim to translate into a book with an academic press. Or if it's not an R1 position, which I aim to translate into 5 articles published in venues A, B, and C, or something like that. And then I proceeded to give an overview of my dissertation. And I went chapter by chapter. I gave a quick little paragraph for each one. So chapter 1 explores X, chapter 2 builds on that idea by exploring Y, etc., etc. And then the final paragraph of the research statement, for me this document was about 1.5 pages single-spaced, and this final paragraph would zoom out and say, here's what I'm hoping to do in the future. After this project, I want to start thinking about the ways that these concepts maybe relate to this other setting. So for me, it was the ways that embodied hyper-awareness doesn't only relate to vlogs, but might relate to podcasting or to virtual reality or to augmented reality or to artificial intelligence and things like that. And it's showing that you're thinking about your research from multiple angles and that you know where you are going in the future. And they could sort of create a trajectory and an agenda for who you will be as a researcher. And I think this is really important specifically for me as a graduate student who didn't have a whole lot of publications, who has not written a book, who is in the process of finishing her dissertation. I applied as I was ABD, all the dissertation, to see that I have an idea of what I'm going to do next. The research statement is also a place where you can cite other people. So in this research statement, for me, I said I build on the ideas of Jody Shipka, Steph Sarasso, Abby Knobloch, and I was naming specific people to show the sort of scholarly conversation that I'm intervening in and contributing to. The next document is the diversity statement. And in my experience, I never saw a job say, we want a diversity statement. They always had specifics, even if it was just one sentence of what they were looking for, to help sort of explain what they meant by diversity statement, because this is a relatively new genre. For the most part, they would say, we want a diversity statement that shows how you strive to work towards diversity, equity, and inclusion in your teaching and research practices. That shows how you work with underrepresented and first-generation students from marginalized backgrounds. Something of this ilk, sort of, for the most part, is what diversity statements were typically looking for. My diversity statement focused on 2 main ideas: how I work towards diversity and equity and accessibility and inclusivity in my research, and how I work towards these same practices in my teaching. Just like the teaching statement, just like the cover letter, just like everything else that I've talked about so far, you need to be as specific as possible. And at this point, it might be hard for your ideas to not overlap. But this is a time where you could think about other experiences you've had, faculty trainings that you've led, mentorship experiences that you've had where you've mentored other people, maybe campus initiatives or organization or clubs that you've started. So in this diversity statement, I highlighted some specific assignments and some core values of my teaching that I didn't talk about in the teaching philosophy statement or in the teaching portfolio. And it also gave me a way to talk about my research in a new light. When I think about the goals of my research and why it matters, it is always to create equitable and accessible and inclusive composing practices within the academy. And this was a way for me to really highlight that. Another approach that some people take with diversity statements is they treat it as more of a positionality statement. And I don't think that this is a bad approach necessarily, but this isn't something I chose to do because on my personal website, I had a page titled On Embodiment. And this was me sort of unpacking what embodiment means to me and how I understand my own body relating to my research as a white woman predominantly. So this was something that I didn't view as totally necessary, but this is another approach to diversity statements that people tend to take. And just like with the teaching statement, this is another place where you might consider citing some scholars. So I open my diversity statement with a quote from Jim Corder in his article Rhetoric as Love, which is amazing. And it really, I think, sort of opens the document nicely and sort of summarizes my main ideas of how I understand my research and my teaching related to some core values. Honestly, this is a document that I'm really intrigued to see what happens in this cycle of jobs, so the 2025-2026 year, especially with everything happening in the world around us, in the United States government. I'm curious to see if this document is still going to be required or honestly even allowed. And then lastly, this may be specific to English and it may be specific to the humanities, but another document that I was frequently asked for was the writing sample. So typically they specified that they wanted about 20 to 25 pages, which maps on pretty nicely to published articles. But for me, my published articles are all either collaboratively written or they're shorter and they were only about 7 to 10 pages. So what I chose to do here was to use a chapter for my dissertation. And this is something I talked about with my advisor. It's pretty common practice, at least in my field, to use a chapter from your dissertation as your writing sample. And what they want to see is your writing style and your writing abilities, but this is also an opportunity for you to tell them a little bit more about your research, for them to see your research. So I had to think really strategically about which chapter I wanted to show. So I didn't include my introduction. I did include the main chapter where I'm really setting, or the first chapter where I'm really setting the stage. I included one of the body chapters where I'm doing rhetorical analysis and actually making my argument. And they can see me not talking about my methodology, but actually implementing it into my research. And they can see me really getting into the nitty-gritty and really analyzing. And again, this was a way for me to not only show my writing style, but to show them a little bit more about my research. I also included a contextualizing blurb before my writing sample. And this was just like a short little paragraph where I said, this writing sample is a section from chapter 2. Chapter 2 covers blank. In the previous chapter, I helped set the stage for this argument by drawing a literature from XYZ, blah, 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 blah. Overall, the dissertation as a whole argues blank. And these little things where you're able to contextualize what you're showing people, whether it's through hyperlinks or including these little blurbs or things like that, I think really will help not only the search committee understand you, but will really help your materials stand out and that they're polished and that you know what they're doing, and just really making your arguments and sort of your personal identity as a scholar more clear. I would love to know what other questions you all have about the application process of the academic job market. I specifically would love to know if you're currently a grad student, if you are already graduated from grad school, if you're an undergrad thinking about maybe being a professor one day, where are you at in the process, why you're watching this video, and what field you're coming from. Are you coming from English and writing studies and Rep Comp? Are you coming from a STEM discipline? And of course, if you have any specific questions about any of these, I would love for you to leave a comment, DM me on Instagram, and I would be happy to chat with you and answer them to the best of my abilities. I'm also posting a lot of content specifically related to the academic job market over on my TikTok, so be sure to follow me there. And I also post a lot of vlogs that show the day of my life as a graduate student, which will soon transition into days and weeks of my life as a professor. So subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video, hopefully.